Ladies and gentlemen, have we got a braai for you this evening, this day, whenever you're listening to this podcast? It's been a wonderful, wonderful weekend of football on the continent of Africa. Some brilliant semi-finals in the CAF Champions League, some brilliant semi-finals in the CAF Confederation Cup, and some absolute chaos going on in the final match day of the Premier Soccer League in South Africa. And there's no one better to digest this with me than Courtney Freese, a former PSL winner on the On the Whistle podcast. Courtney, how are you doing this evening?
Alasdair, very excited to talk about all the topics you mentioned. I've never seen a end of season like it, where teams that were fighting at the top end of African competitions were fighting relegation in their own places and own goals, capacity stadiums. And I need to give so many apologies out there to all the Sundowns people. Goodness gracious, that's where we need to start, Alasdair. Courtney, apologize.
Absolutely, which is not something you hear very often. Let me tell you, Courtney's not quick to apologize, but let me tell you, Courtney, coming back to the Sundowns game, you said you weren't going to be impressed with the atmosphere coming from the Sundowns fans. You know, it's often been accused as a bit of a plastic club, a club that doesn't have much culture, much energy. And especially when you compare that to the first Wydad game, when Wydad fans, the ultras, always provide a stellar atmosphere, but actually the Sundowns fans came out with the color.
So, firstly, that's where I think we should start, Alistair. I was very critical after the first leg. I looked at the atmosphere. I highlighted it so much of what Wydad had out there in Casablanca. What a beautiful setting. I still can't get over it. I feel more games should be held out there at that level. Beautiful. And I just didn't feel that Sundowns could replicate anything similar to that and bring a wave of yellow. But I'm wrong. They did a tsunami of yellow all over. What an atmosphere! Um, Before the game, the social media was buzzing for the semi-final, and wow! Also, what a game! What a game! I'm telling you, Alistair. The thing that impressed me the most is that watching it, the opportunities on show, but some of the saves from the goalkeepers, man. Goodness gracious me. It had everything. I thoroughly enjoyed the game. Just sad with the way it ended.
I mean, yes, sad for the Sundowns fans and for those South Africans hoping for Mamelodi Sundowns to get to the final. Just a quick recap. Mamelodi Sundowns came into their home tie against Wydad Casablanca. It was 0-0 after what the first leg in Casablanca, which was again a crazy game in of itself. Sundowns reduced to 9 men, but holding on for the 0-0. And Sundowns took the lead in this game through a brilliant Tembazwane goal. Ayub El Amloud pulled it back with a lovely header before Sundowns retook the lead in the 79th minute, thinking that they were going through to the final. But another goal by Peter Shalilule, who continues to impress. But just a few minutes later, Sundowns' hearts were broken when Mothobi Mvala headed into his own goal. Wydad managed the game out. And in CAF football, the away goal rules still count. So Wydad Casablanca are through to the final to play against Al-Ahly of Egypt to reignite that rivalry after Al-Ahly dispatched Esperance 1-0 and 4-0 on aggregate. But on the Sundowns game, on this Wydad game, Courtney, I mean, it felt, what went wrong for Sundowns? Because it felt coming into this, there was such a wave of positivity. They've been playing some of the best football we've ever seen on the continent in terms of the style, the brand, the excitement, the goals, the number of goals they concede. It's just incredible football from Coach Murulani Mokoena. And, if you want to hear more about that, we spoke to Maher Mazahi, who interviewed Mokoena for a piece last week. Go back to listen to that. But, here they were playing a team in Wydad who really struggled at home against Sundowns, didn't look the shadow of themselves from last year, and yet Wydad got the job done. What went wrong for Sundowns?
Well, listen, Alistair, I think there was an element of deception there. I will say this, and let me tell you why I feel that. Wydad, what they showed in the first leg, I thought to myself, Sundowns will walk over them. There was absolutely no impetus at home. They just looked flat. They didn't look like they had a punch in them. They looked lethargic. They looked leggy. They looked like they had been overrun, overworked, and there was just no energy in them. Now, yes, I do understand that they had a manager change very shortly before the first leg game. Totally understand it. But Wydad just didn't look like they were supposed to be in that semi-final competition. They just didn't look like it. We accidentally got here. The second leg, they just look unrecognizable. And you must also remember, for the people that are watching this game, uh, where Loftus Versfeld is, it's at altitude. There's the other thing, So that has to be taken into account. Going to play football in Pretoria will really take a strain on you if you don't acclimatize well. But these guys looked fantastic in the second leg. Yes, you got to admire Timbazwane's goal. I think, if you're looking at a composed, classy finish, the way he picks it up from a good press, there's your first thing. The trap is set. They break it down as the defender's about to collect the ball. He picks up on it, and then he just curls it with a very lovely shape into the bottom left-hand corner of the goalkeeper. Very relaxed, good finish, just increasing the profile of Timbazwane.
And I mean, Courtney, you're a man who's played kind of at a high level of football. You've been under pressure situations. And, we speak so much in continental football, whether it's, in Africa, in Europe, in Asia, in South America, how much pedigree matters. There's a reason why Ahly are serial winners. There's a reason why Real Madrid are serial winners. And we saw that with Wydad. What really struck me about this game was once Wydad had gotten that second goal, gotten that equalizer, they played almost 50. There's still 15 minutes of the game left about, but Sundowns didn't lay a glove on them. Sundowns couldn't get in the game because Wydad managed it so well. Like how important is that kind of experience of these, so many of these players have been there and done that. They won it last season. They've been battling in the Batola Pro all this season with the likes of Asfar Rabat and Raja. How much does that actual, the fact that they have that pedigree, whereas Sundowns seem to have a chip on their shoulder.
Alasdair, the question you ask has got so many multiple facets in terms of an answer. And I'll try and put all the variables in here, in this. My biggest problem with the goal. So firstly, let's look at the equalizing goal, right? A wonderful crossing from the right-hand side, taken with a left footer. So basically the cross puts the defense under threat. If you don't win it at the first man, the ball, the second man has the opportunity of scoring an own goal, which is exactly what happened. If the own goal doesn't get scored, the ball just goes straight in. There's the other thing. It's a deadly cross. It's an undefendable cross if the first man doesn't win it. This is what happened. The equalizer gets scored. Now, going back to your question of game management, this is another style of managing a game. This is what managers talk about and where they earn their money. When we up, how do we then control the game? Now, controlling the game when you're at home, when you are flying, when you have your supporters behind you is one thing. When you are away from home, capacity crowd, very few of your supporters, and you are on a bit of a positive result, that's a different thing. So the Wydad manager and players have to be given exceptional credit on just how they managed it. What you got to do is also give credit to the goalkeeper, man. First half took a lot of saves. I just don't know what went wrong with Sundowns second half. Like you said, didn't lay a glove on them. But this also has to come down to Wydad, how they kept him at different spaces, not allowing them to get too close to the goal. And with 20 minutes to go, you think to yourself, there has to be a chance here. And there wasn't. There was nothing.
Yeah, and it's interesting, we spoke last week, Maher was telling us about how the many ways in which Rulani Mokoena was trying to prepare his team for that hostile environment in Casablanca, the way in which he was saying they're putting them under mental stress so that when they actually come in training, so that when they come into the actual game, they're used to that stress, so it's a little easier to play. But it was interesting hearing the Wydad coach Sven van der Berg talking about after the game how, Wydad had explicitly prepared how to manage the final 10 minutes of the game. He said in the press conference, they prepared for different scenarios. If they're one goal behind and they're chasing the game, if they're holding on to the lead, if they're comfortable, how do they manage that? And you could see that the way in which, they went after that second goal, and the first. And like you said, I think I've seen a lot online of, fans kind of complaining about Mothobi Mvala and saying like, big mix up between him and Ronwen Williams. But like you said, that is an incredible cross from Yaya Atiat Allah, who, bear in mind, is the man who crossed that ball for Youssef En-Nesyri to score that stunning header for Morocco in the World Cup quarterfinals to take them to the semi-finals against Portugal. This is a man with a terrific delivery. But yeah, I think we have to give credit to Wydad in the way in which they managed the kind of final minutes and that experience that they have.
The problem we have with the cross is that, so firstly, let's look at the outcome. It's an own goal. And the supporters would be giving, I'm trying to think of the guy who scored the own goal, Mvala, sorry. Supporters would be giving him a hard time. I've seen it on social media. I was listening to the social media after the game with the Sundowns TV, giving him a hard time. You couldn't do nothing. With that cross, you couldn't do nothing. If he didn't touch it, it was going in. If he didn't touch it, it was going in. Ronwin was in a position where it's also not his fault. The cross is perfect. It's a dangerous cross. It leaves you with no alternative to either touch it or not touch it. And the majority of time in touching that ball, it's going to be an own goal. So, and also what makes it even worse is the weight and the speed of the ball. So, unless you're in the position, you'll think to yourself, well, he could have defended it. No, he couldn't have. The ball was at the front part of his head. He couldn't do anything about it. It was going to be an own goal. It's just unfortunate for that. Maybe going back, because hindsight is a beautiful thing. Hindsight is a beautiful thing. Think about who's taking the cross. Let's go back to your statistics. I can't believe Rulani Mokwena hasn't had this conversation. It's placing the man in front of the free kick to change the projection of the free kick. Now, Alasdair, this is a very, and I don't mean to disrespect anybody that's listening to this, but but I'm sure it will. The guy with the left-footed cross is going to whip it from left to right as he hits it. It's going to go. So you put one of your tall men standing 10 yards away, a bit to the left of the cross. So that means this guy now has to think about how he sets the cross off. He's not aiming for where he is. He has to set the cross that goes wide of the player and out. And that changes the whole projection of the ball. So it's those small things and it's things to think about afterwards. But listen, long story short, quality cross, unfortunate own goal. Wydad in the final. What was Sundowns doing in the last 20 to 15 minutes? There is your analysis. What were you doing?
And I think we want to move on to because there's plenty more to talk about. But I'll give you a final word on Sundowns. How will they respond to this? Because they've been confirmed as PSL champions weeks and weeks ago. They're dominant in South Africa, but this was, they have only won one Champions League titles under Pitso Mosimane, back in 2016. And also, let's not forget, this might be the last CAF Champions League there ever will be, because we're seeing later this year the introduction of the African Super League. Now, we've been told many different things about it. We've been told that the CAF Champions League, will still exist, but it certainly won't carry the same pedigree that it has now, because the biggest teams, including probably Sundowns, will be in the Super League. So how much more will it hurt both Sundown fans, the players, but especially Rulani Mokwena, the fact that this might have been and probably was their last ever chance to win the CAF Champions League final?
It's a gargantuan failure, in my opinion. Gargantuan. Absolute. Everything was there. You must remember, Sundowns are one of the best, most prepared teams on the continent. Dylan Kerr was on here a few weeks. He was telling us what they do in order to be ready for games. Yes, I think this failure to get to the final will hurt and hurt tremendously, because there is no other opportunity to get to this type of final. The Super League comes in, this format goes away. And it becomes even harder now with the Super League. I think Rulani will sit down with his team. Firstly, take some time away from the game, but then sit down and analyze what could we have done. I still think that more could have been done in order to be a bit more direct. Now, I'll take you back to the days, and nobody will make a fuss about this, Alistair, but sometimes you got to go direct and you got to go ugly in football when things aren't working. Okay, I remember Gary Lineker talking about when he was at Barcelona under Bobby Robson. He said we used to play this excellent football. He said, but when things weren't working, they used to take the centre back, put him up front, and let him cause some chaos and play long balls. This was happening at Barcelona. I remember when we were at Manning Rangers under Gordon Ingerson. It never used to happen many times, but there was a period we used to take Gavin Radford, who was the sweeper, and put him up front and then hit long balls to him. Having the big man in the box that can knock balls down, hold play up, and create a bit of physical present negativity in the box needed to happen. You cannot always play fantastic football. And the 20-minute window, as you said, how Wydad prepared for their 20-minute window. Where was the 20-minute preparation by Sundowns? They will really be hurting at this time. Really be hurting, man.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure Sundowns will rally again and come back strong next year. Even though they got knocked out, it's a cup competition. These things can happen. They experienced it in the Next Bank Cup as well. But they play brilliant football. We're looking forward to seeing more of them, especially if this African Super League comes off the ground and we get to see them playing against the very best. We look forward to it. But for Wydad, they're through to the final, and guess who they play? I'll give you any guess. Everyone will get it. I swear, even someone living in Papua New Guinea, if you tell them who's in the CAF Champions League final, they'll be like, no question, Al Ahly. Of course, Al Ahly are in the final. They tried their best to get knocked out in the group stages against Al Hilal, but they got through that. They've beaten Raja, they've beaten Esperance, both fairly comfortably, and now they're in the final once again against Wydad. Now, bear in mind, for those who have not been switched on to the Champions League the last year, a year ago, Al Ahly, Wydad faced off in the final, and at that point, there was no ground selected. CAF hadn't awarded the hosting rights to any ground. And so, with just a few weeks before the game, the rights were awarded to Wydad's home ground. Technically not associated with them, the Mohammed V Stadium, because them and Raja both own it, and it's also their international stadium. But Wydad were effectively playing a home game, one leg, Pitso Mosemane versus Walid Regragui. A lot of bad blood between Wydad and Al Ahly, although not between those two. And Wydad came out on top. Now we've returned, partially, I think, because of that fiasco. CAF has returned to a home and away two-legged final. And so now Wydad are going to be going to Cairo to play Al Ahly in the first leg. Courtney, how just put yourself in the shoes of an Al Ahly fan. How excited would you be to rubbing your hands together, saying, oh, revenge can be so, so, so sweet. What is that environment going to be like?
Well, listen, you heard me talk so glowingly about the Casablanca environment. The Cairo environment is just going to have a bit of an edge more. What Cairo fans would have been wanting is the second leg to be in Cairo. But it's going to be, firstly, North Africa showing its power again. Let's just start there. North Africa. Unfortunately, as we said, we all heard Sundowns don't get to it, but the North African teams and Al Ahly, the giants that they are with Percy Tau, just the atmosphere that's going to be there. It's going to be electric. And thank goodness there's two legs to this final. How exciting is that? When last has there been two legs to a final? That is so exciting. We're giving the supporters of both crowds the opportunity to watch this final twice. Come on. I can't wait. I wish the Champions League final in Europe was on two legs. I wish it was.
And you see, in recent years, perhaps not this year, but we've seen how fans in Europe, particularly, the semi-finals tend to be the best, the most exciting, because you have the teams playing at home in front of their home fans. European finals, it's a snooze fest because it's a tight game, but also there's no fans there. It's all corporates, it's all executives, it's all media people, it's all sponsors. Whereas in CAF football in Africa and Asia, we saw it when Al Hilal took on Urawa. You get the home crowds and you get that excitement, you get that fire. And I can't wait. I think, from my perspective, Al Ahly will have to be favorites. They always have to be favorites, but potentially bar last year, which Wydad were favorites. But, Courtney, with your PSL hat, with your South African biased hat on, what a season in the Champions League Percy Tau is having. Doesn't he set up another goal in Al Ahly's 1-0 win against Esperance? Go watch the highlights. That pass was a thing of beauty, slicing the defense open for El Shahab to finish. But he's 5 assists, 4 goals, and I've also been seeing rumors that there's been interest from clubs in Belgium, where he had a very good stint previously. Courtney, you talked last week about how important it was for him to stay at Al Ahly and succeed after Pizzo had left with all that pressure on him. For now, what do you think would be best for him? To stay with Al Ahly, to keep playing this, or if he gets a chance to try and reestablish himself back in Europe? Bear in mind, I think he's 29, so getting on in years. Just what are your thoughts on Percy Tau and his situation?
Firstly, let's congratulate him for getting to the final and playing an instrumental role in getting his team there. His semi-final performance was excellent. Esperance were obviously a weak team, but you got to put them to the sword. You got to win clinically. You got to be good, and he was excellent. Let's just start there. To answer your question, I'll answer it in a short term and a long term. The short term, win the trophy. Add another notch in his belt. Add another bit of silverware, and not just any silver, big silverware, to his cabinet that's even more full than Tottenham Hotspur's cabinet.
That's not saying much, to be fair.
Well, then secondly, move. 100% leave Al Ahly. Why? 29 years old, the opportunity to go back into Europe. He won't just go to anybody. The rumors are Anderlecht, firstly. Okay, so they are at the top end of the spectrum in Belgium. An opportunity for him to go back there, do well. He's not going to crack it in the bigger leagues, in the Premier League. He wasn't given a proper opportunity, but get back into Belgium and now start getting himself ready for his latter years as a professional. But I think that is a short-term and long-term project he should be looking at. Moving into Belgium and really putting down a marker. I'm coming back here having won big things, of which some of them haven't won in their lives or even got to cup finals. So whoever gets Percy Tau on that level in Europe would be one hell of a lucky team.
Moving on, we've spoken about the CAF Champions League. We've spoken about Percy Tau and his journey in the Champions League. But the Champions League was not the only continental football being played this week. Earlier on Wednesday, we saw the CAF Confederation Cup semi-finals take place. And Courtney, once again, you had a vested interest in one of these matches. It was, our friend Dylan Kerr's plucky Marumo Gallants going up against the giants of Tanzania, Yanga. They were 2-0 down after the first leg. And, you said you still had hope. You said you still had faith, especially because they had a terrific home record. For instance, they lost to the other finalist, USM of Algiers, 2-0 away, and then took them back to South Africa, 1-2-0. But Yanga got the job done. Fiston Mayele, inspired performance with a goal and assist. Superb assist. Check out that assist for the second goal, running kind of half the length of the pitch in a couple strides. Unbelievable. But, just quickly from you, what went wrong for Gallants? How did Yanga do it?
Alasdair, I think of 2002, South Korea and Japan. Delron Buckley comes on our show when we first started off 3.5 years ago and says to us, the night before they played Spain, they were up until 3 o'clock in the morning fighting about bonuses, fighting about salaries, fighting about people not being paid. What were the reports coming out the day before the game between Marumo Gallants and Young Africans? What was the reports? Players not being paid, the media sending out reports that the club has paid, all the wrong messages, absolutely all the wrong vibes. And then I was worried, Alasdair. That's when I was worried. Prior to that, I just thought they have got a knockout punch waiting 2-0 down, first leg, it's not a problem. Once you get one goal, 2-0 be a terrible score to get. You eventually are going to get the second one. But all the wrong messages were coming out. None of the messages were about how Marumo Gallants were ready. It was about salaries and paying and players not being paid, clubs sending messages out that players have been paid. It was just ridiculous, ridiculous. But speaking to the manager who's been trying to hold together a ship that has absolutely been going the wrong way and going the wrong way quickly, he said they still could have won that game. He said the amount of opportunities from his perspective that they put together, he's just very proud of the players. And, Dylan is a very honest man. If he says to you, Courtney, they walked all over us, that's what happened. Now, he was bitter because 4-1 doesn't represent what his team, that represents his identity, put in place. Young Africans just took their chances at the right time. Also scoring goals at the right time and also diffuse the game as well. And that wasn't the case, They also weren't that much better, but I think Marumo Gallants had gone as far as they were supposed to. This was a fairy tale. You must remember, this is not fiction. It's non-fiction.
For me, it felt like, in football, we love to stereotype. We often say in society we shouldn't stereotype, and very oftentimes that's true. But in football, somehow we have a blind eye. We stereotype all the time. And this game, to me, felt like it really played into one of the narratives that we see with South African football, both at a club and international level, where the football is good, the technical skill is there. Marumo Gallants playing some excellent passing triangles, moving the ball really quickly. Shivario looked excellent again, but physically they couldn't keep up. And we saw that with that second goal, with Mayele in particular, who was an absolute unit. I think the Gallant center back compared him to Cristiano Ronaldo. That felt like the difference, is that you had a team that was organized in Yanga and also incredibly physical. And although Gallants played some good football, played some neat and tidy football, they just couldn't keep up with kind of the physical side of things.
And this is why I say, Alasdair, you can't be too critical on the team. And I think that's Dylan's message. Don't be too critical. We weren't supposed to be there. We got there, with a team. If he has to put a team together, he wouldn't be picking all these players. He would want a bit more to give him more of a chance. But if you look at Youngers, when they scored their goals just before halftime, that creates a different level of pressure. So you're going in, now you're 3-0 down. There's the pressure. And then they get one on the 60th minute, where normally managers make huge substitutions in games to change the game. And that's when the fourth one comes. So now you're really under pressure. You're really chasing yourself. I just thought from Young Africans, they managed the game well. Marumo Gallants ran out of steam and didn't have any more punches to throw. But they've got to be given credit. I just think that the narrative I started with at the beginning of this conversation, listen, please, man, if there's someone out there listening to this, listen to just this point, please. As African footballers, let's stop disabling ourselves in preparation for tournaments or games. Please, this is just not helping. That players are not being paid. The day before big games, people are fighting about money, fighting about bonus. This should not be coming out. This should not be in the media. Treat your players well, man. Then we won't have these. Because honestly, I'm telling you, as soon as I saw those reports, Alasdair, I knew that was them. Done. Finished. Like South Africa in 2002 against Spain, loss. Similar. Loss.
And if you want, listener, to hear a bit more about Marumo Gallants' kind of travails and the ways in which kind of mismanagement has really cost them in terms of their CAF continental journey, go back to our earlier pods just a couple weeks ago. We did a 2-part series with Dylan Kerr, where he outlines particularly what happened in that kind of chaotic trip to Libya, in which two of their team of their staff were held hostage, and the South African kind of government had to get involved to help release them. But yeah, it's such a shame. But we've talked a lot, Courtney, from with the South African hat on, and that makes sense. You're a former PSL player. We have a lot of South African influence in this podcast, oftentimes much to mine and Francis's pain. But I'm gonna put my East African hat on, and I'm pretending to be East African and not Kenyan right now, because I think it is brilliant for Yanga to be in this final. A brilliant story. First time they've ever been to a CAF final of any sort. I think they're the first East African team since I think it's the 60s, when Gormaya from Kenya made it to the final. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's all the way back then, maybe the 80s. But it's been a long, long time. And also them playing against USM Algier, who first time for them being in the CAF Confederation Cup. Obviously, they were in the Champions League final almost a decade ago when they lost to TP Mazembe. But, one thing we've spoken about since our inception of the pod, like you mentioned earlier, 3.5 years, is, we're coming into a post-COVID world, and how much we want to see these stadiums full, how much we want to see the excitement. And I cannot think, I'm sorry to Marumo Gallants, but in terms of a spectacle, having USM of Algier and Yanga in the final will be brilliant. Both we saw in the USM Algier game against ASEC Mimosa, in which they won 2-0, comfortably winning it. Fully packed stadium. Maher Mazahi was telling us that the stadium, the 5th of July stadium, was sold out in just a couple hours. Benjamin Mkapa Stadium in Dar es Salaam, it will be fired up. These are two of the best atmospheres you're going to see. And with Wydad and Ahly, yes, for those of us south of the Sahara, it's a bit disappointing that it's once again North African teams cleaning up, but the atmosphere is going to be brilliant. And, I'm sorry to Marumo Gallants, but for me as a spectacle, I'm so happy Yanga are there, because I think it's going to be a brilliant final. But unfortunately, we have to keep piling it in on Marumo Gallants, because this weekend it was not only the CAF Champions League and Confederation Cup semi-finals, but it was also the final match day in the PSL. And for those of you who haven't been keeping up with the PSL, yes, Sundowns won it centuries ago. They've already won this title. But if you look beyond that, beyond the title race, it has been a thrilling, thrilling end to the season. Just to give you a rundown of what happened on the final day, Orlando Pirates and Supersport United were vying for that second place spot. Friend of the pod, Gavin Hunt, and his Supersport team had been in second place for much of the season, but Orlando Pirates got the job done, beating Amazulu 4-0, while Supersport lost against Sekakune, which left Pirates in second in that CAF Champions League spot. But listener, it gets better looking down the table. Courtney's very own, his hometown club, Maritzburg United, came 15th in the relegation playoff. They'll have to play that in that relegation playoff now. And as we were speaking earlier, with our very strong bias, we want them to get relegated because they refuse to come on the podcast. But once they come on the podcast and speak to us, then we'll get them promoted again. Don't worry. But last place, and I kid you not, last place in the Premier Soccer League, relegated on the final day after a 2-0 loss against Swallows, is Marumo Gallants. Courtney, Marumo Gallants, we've just been speaking about them in a Confederation Cup semi-final, on the verge of playing the same team they topped the group of. Bear in mind, they didn't come second in their group. They beat USM Algier in their group. And yet we're talking about them being relegated. What is this madness?
But listen, this is why you love football. This is why movie stars from Canada and America go and buy a team in Wrexham and take them into the National League. Listen, as I say, this is wonderful. This is the brilliance of football, and this is what we love. There are so many narratives from the top to the bottom that you mentioned there, Alasdair, and you could spend half an hour on each of them. Let's just look at the top part. Sundowns won the league 3 years ago. That league was won. Okay, Pirates are fighting. Sekukuna pick up a manager, Brendan Truter, who luckily who we interviewing tomorrow, Alasdair?
Brendan Truter.
Brandon is on with us to talk to us about the Nedbank Cup final and also about his career. So he comes in, Gavin Hunter steamrolling second place. He's got it secure. They end up beating Supersport 1-0. Pirates take over. Supersport finished third. There's another problem. Then you go to the bottom of the table. You have Maritzburg United, as I said, my hometown team, who refused to talk to us, whose media officer, I think, must have 3 jobs because no one can ever get hold of him. Um, I, they were dead and buried a few weeks ago, dead and buried, and then came up with a couple of results, going to the playoffs against, guess who? Mr. Cape Town Spurs, Sean Bartlett, who is coming on the show in a few weeks' time to talk about his club. Then Marumo Gallants get relegated. Playing so well in Africa, get relegated. And guess who relegates them? Dylan Kerr's former club, Swallows. They relegate them. By goodness gracious. With every game and result, there is a narrative that is so closely linked. Swallows beat Marumo Gallants. Marumo Gallants get relegated. And just to throw another cocktail into it, they have their celebration that evening, their evening out, celebrating the achievements of the season. Who's their guest speaker? Lucas Radebe. On the day Leeds get relegated. Oh my gosh. No one's doing well. No one's
It's
doing
all
well.
pain
I'm
and
going to throw
suffering.
one more thing. I'm going to throw one more thing in it. Marumo Gallants get relegated with prize money of 14.4 million rand. To win the PSL is 15 million rand. So the team that came bottom earned almost more money than the winners. Come on, man.
Unbelievable.
Listen, you know, if you said to someone, tell me the story, something, no, that could have never happened.
Honestly, it deserves a podcast of its own, because I think, and let's be fair to them, you know, this Gallant story in terms of the Champions League, it was not kind of a Chelsea in 2012 Champions League where, you know, they're
No.
a rubbish team, but they're grinding results out. You know, this is a team that beat USM Algier in the group stage, came top of their group. In the quarterfinals, they played Pyramids, one of the favorites, probably along Asfar Rabat at the beginning, beat
Beat
them
them.
incredibly, and then went toe to toe with Yanga. You know, this has been an incredible journey for them, and it ends just 3 days after they're denied a place in the final of the Confederation Cup. Just 3 days later, they are staring down the barrel of a relegation by only 1 point on the last day. You know, bear in mind, and it wasn't just them and Maritzburg United. Chippa United were also in the mix. They ended alongside Maritzburg United, both on 30 points, with Marumo Gallants on 29. And Chippa got the draw on the last day of the season, but Gallants couldn't get it done, and it's just absolute madness in the PSL. And this is why we love football, like you said, the
But
narratives,
USM
the
Algier,
journey, and bear in mind again, 1 point between Maritzburg United and Marumo Gallants.
1 point.
Marumo
Yeah.
Gallants have a much better goal difference. So if they had gotten just 1 point, and guess who Maritzburg United got their 1 point in the last day of the season? Mamelodi Sundowns, the best team in the land, the team that's cruising to, looking like they're going to go to a Champions League final and have won the PSL, by an absolute country mile, and Maritzburg United get a draw with them. And that draw, that 1 point, has put them at least into the relegation playoff and sent Marumo Gallants down. I mean, like you said, Courtney, this is why we love this game. This is beautiful.
You know, and Marumo Gallants, what a gallant effort, let's say, that they put out there. USM Algier, a fantastic team, ran all over ASIC Mimosa, ran all over them. Were absolutely, Mimosa weren't in the game, right? Weren't in the game. Algier played fantastic. In the second leg, they were all over them. The goals that they scored, the momentum, they were just back and forth. And if it wasn't for the Mimosa goalkeeper, it could have been more. It should have been more, let me say that. So, if you have to look at those two, Gallants outplayed Alger in the group stage. It just makes no sense that they ended up where they ended up. I don't understand it. I really don't understand. But this is football. The league still continues. The playoffs now come into play. This is the difficult part. Maritzburg could still go down. Cape Town Spurs, with a great legacy within South Africa, could come up, led by their former striker, Sean Bartlett, who I actually owe an apology to. I must tell
Another
you.
apology. 2-in-1 podcast.
Oh gosh, I actually need to phone Sean, because when they won on the last game of the season, I thought they were promoted, and I congratulated him.
Oh no.
Oh, I thought two get promoted, not one. Oh man! And he said, "No, but we gotta play in the playoffs." Polokwane had gone through. Oh, my heart. So Sean, if you're listening, I'm so sorry. Oh, sorry.
Well, Sean is certainly listening. Of course he is, because anyone is listening to the On the Whistle podcast. So Sean, I hope you accept that apology. Courtney, we've spoken for a good long while about the pains and the joys of football on the African continent. We've seen some terrific football over the next weekend, and as Courtney said, a look ahead, we're not quite, we want to get away from South Africa, like I said, me and Francis, but we're staying there for another bit, because we're going to have a bonus podcast interviewing Brandon Truter, the head coach of Sekakune United, who qualified for the CAF Confederation Cup, who are in the final of the Nedbank Cup this weekend against Orlando Pirates. So stay tuned, because that is going to be a brilliant podcast. Courtney, thank you so much for kind of joining me around the bride tonight and chatting some of the madness of football and the game that we love.